4. Chapters 13 through 16. Chapter 13. The Traitress. After luncheon we began to play at round games, in which I took a lively part. While indulging in cat and mouse, I happened to cannon rather awkwardly against Kornakoff's governess, who was playing with us, and, stepping on her dress, tore a large hole in it. Seeing that the girls, particularly Sonetchka, were anything but displeased at the spectacle of the governess angrily departing to the maidservant's room to have her dress mended, I resolved to procure them the satisfaction of a second time. Accordingly, in pursuance of this amiable resolution, I waited until my victim returned, and then began to gallop madly round her, until a favourable moment occurred for once more planting my heel upon her dress, and reopening the rent. Sonetchka and the young princesses had much ado to restrain their laughter, which excited my conceit the more, but St. Jerome, who had probably divined my tricks, came up to me with the frown which I could never abide in him, and said that since I seemed disposed to mischief, he would have to send me away if I did not moderate my behaviour. However, I was in the desperate position of a person who, having staked more than he has in his pocket, and feeling that he can never make up his account, continues to plunge on unlucky cards, not because he hopes to regain his losses, but because it will not do for him to stop and consider. So I merely laughed in an impudent fashion, and flung away from my monitor. After cat and mouse, another game followed, in which the gentlemen sit on one row of chairs and the ladies on another, and choose each other for partners. The youngest princess always chose the younger Iwin, Katenka either Woloda or Ilinka, and Sonetchka Seriosha. Nor, to my extreme astonishment, did Sonetchka seem at all embarrassed when her cavalier went and sat down beside her. On the contrary, she only laughed her sweet musical laugh, and made a sign with her head that he had chosen right. Since nobody chose me, I always had the mortification of finding myself left over, and of hearing them say, "Who has been left out? Oh, Nicolinka! Well, do take him, somebody!" Consequently, whenever it came to my turn to guess who had chosen me, I had to go either to my sister or to one of the ugly elder princesses. Sonetchka seemed so absorbed in Seriosha that in her eyes I clearly existed no longer. I do not quite know why I called her the traitress in my thoughts, since she had never promised to choose me instead of Seriosha, but for all that, I felt convinced that she was treating me in a very abominable fashion. After the game was finished, I actually saw the traitress, from whom I nevertheless could not withdraw my eyes, go with Seriosha and Katenka into a corner, and engage in secret confabulation. Stealing softly round the piano, which masked the conclave, I beheld the following. Katenka was holding up a pocket-handkerchief by two of its corners, so as to form a screen for the heads of her two companions. "No, you have lost! You must pay the forfeit!" cried Seriosha at that moment, and Sonetchka, who was standing in front of him, blushed like a criminal as she replied, "No, I have not lost. Have I, Mademoiselle Catherine?" "Well, I must speak the truth," answered Katenka, "and say that you have lost, my dear." Scarcely had she spoken the words when Seriosha embraced Sonetchka and kissed her right on her rosy lips, and Sonetchka smiled as though it were nothing, but merely something very pleasant. Horrors! The artful traitress! Chapter 14. The Retribution. Instantly I began to feel a strong contempt for the female sex in general and Sonetchka in particular. I began to think that there was nothing at all amusing in these games, that they were only fit for girls, and felt as though I should like to make a great noise, or to do something of such extraordinary boldness that every one would be forced to admire it. The opportunity soon arrived. St. Jerome said something to Mimi, and then left the room. I could hear his footsteps ascending the staircase, and then passing across the schoolroom, and the idea occurred to me that Mimi must have told him her story about my being found on the landing, and thereupon he had gone to look at the register. In those days, it must be remembered, I believed that St. Jerome's whole aim in life was to annoy me. Somewhere I have read that, not infrequently, children of from 12 to 14 years of age, that is to say, children just passing from childhood to adolescence, are addicted to incendiarism, or even to murder. As I look back on my childhood, and particularly upon the mood in which I was on that particular, for myself, most unlucky day, I can quite understand the possibility of such terrible crimes being committed by children without any real aim in view, without any wish to do wrong, but merely out of curiosity or under the influence of an unconscious necessity for action. There are moments when the human being sees the future in such lurid colours that he shrinks from fixing his mental eye upon it, puts a check upon all his intellectual activity, and tries to feel convinced that the future will never be, and that the past has never been. At such moments, moments when thought does not shrink from manifestations of will, and the carnal instincts alone constitute the springs of life, I can understand that want of experience, which is a particularly predisposing factor in this connection, might very possibly lead a child, without fear or hesitation, but rather with a smile of curiosity on its face, to set fire to the house in which its parents and brothers and sisters, beings whom it tenderly loves, are lying asleep. It would be under the same influence of momentary absence of thought, almost absence of mind, that a peasant boy of 17 might catch sight of the edge of a newly sharpened axe reposing near the bench on which his aged father was lying asleep, face downwards, and suddenly raise the implement in order to observe with unconscious curiosity how the blood would come spurting out upon the floor if he made a wound in the sleeper's neck. It is under the same influence, the same absence of thought, the same instinctive curiosity, that a man finds delight in standing on the brink of an abyss and thinking to himself, "How if I were to throw myself down?" or in holding to his brow a loaded pistol and wondering, "What if I were to pull the trigger?" or in feeling, when he catches sight of some universally respected personage, that he would like to go up to him, pull his nose hard, and say, "How do you do, old boy?" Under the spell, then, of this instinctive agitation and lack of reflection, I was moved to put out my tongue, and to say that I would not move, when St. Jerome came down and told me that I had behaved so badly that day, as well as done my lessons so ill, that I had no right to be where I was and must go upstairs directly. At first, from astonishment and anger, he could not utter a word. "C'est bien!" he exclaimed eventually as he darted towards me. "Several times have I promised to punish you, and you have been saved from it by your Grandmamma, but now I see that nothing but the cane will teach you obedience, and you shall therefore taste it." This was said loud enough for every one to hear. The blood rushed to my heart with such vehemence that I could feel that organ beating violently, could feel the colour rising to my cheeks, and my lips trembling. Probably I looked horrible at that moment, for, avoiding my eye, St. Jerome stepped forward and caught me by the hand. Hardly feeling his touch, I pulled away my hand in blind fury, and with all my childish might struck him. "What are you doing?" said Woloda, who had seen my behaviour, and now approached me in alarm and astonishment. "Let me alone!" I exclaimed, the tears flowing fast. "Not a single one of you loves me or understands how miserable I am. You are all of you odious and disgusting," I added bluntly, turning to the company at large. At this moment St. Jerome, his face pale but determined, approached me again, and with a movement too quick to admit of any defence, seized my hands as with a pair of tongs, and dragged me away. My head swam with excitement, and I can only remember that so long as I had strength to do it I fought with head and legs, that my nose several times collided with a pair of knees, that my teeth tore someone's coat, that all around me I could hear the shuffling of feet, and that I could smell dust and the scent of violets with which St. Jerome used to perfume himself. 5 minutes later the door of the store-room closed behind me. "Basil," said a triumphant but detestable voice, "bring me the cane." Chapter 15. Dreams. Could I at that moment have supposed that I should ever live to survive the misfortunes of that day, or that there would ever come a time when I should be able to look back upon those misfortunes composedly? As I sat there thinking over what I had done, I could not imagine what the matter had been with me. I only felt with despair that I was for ever lost. At first the most profound stillness reigned around me. At least, so it appeared to me as compared with the violent internal emotion which I had been experiencing. But by and by I began to distinguish various sounds. Basil brought something downstairs which he laid upon a chest outside. It sounded like a broomstick. Below me I could hear St. Jerome's grumbling voice. Probably he was speaking of me. And then children's voices and laughter and footsteps, until in a few moments everything seemed to have regained its normal course in the house, as though nobody knew or cared to know that here I was sitting alone in the dark store-room. I did not cry, but something lay heavy, like a stone, upon my heart. Ideas and pictures passed with extraordinary rapidity before my troubled imagination. Yet through their fantastic sequence broke continually the remembrance of the misfortune which had befallen me as I once again plunged into an interminable labyrinth of conjectures as to the punishment, the fate, and the despair that were awaiting me. The thought occurred to me that there must be some reason for the general dislike, even contempt, which I fancied to be felt for me by others. I was firmly convinced that every one, from Grandmamma down to the coachman Philip, despised me, and found pleasure in my sufferings. Next, an idea struck me that perhaps I was not the son of my father and mother at all, nor Woloda's brother, but only some unfortunate orphan who had been adopted by them out of compassion. And this absurd notion not only afforded me a certain melancholy consolation, but seemed to me quite probable. I found it comforting to think that I was unhappy, not through my own fault, but because I was fated to be so from my birth, and conceived that my destiny was very much like poor Karl Ivanitch's. Why conceal the secret any longer now that I have discovered it? I reflected. Tomorrow I will go to Papa and say to him, "It is in vain for you to try and conceal from me the mystery of my birth. I know it already." And he will answer me, "What else could I do, my good fellow? Sooner or later you would have had to know that you are not my son, but were adopted as such. Nevertheless, so long as you remain worthy of my love, I will never cast you out." Then I shall say, "Papa, though I have no right to call you by that name, and am now doing so for the last time, I have always loved you, and shall always retain that love. At the same time, while I can never forget that you have been my benefactor, I cannot remain longer in your house. Nobody here loves me, and St. Jerome has wrought my ruin. Either he or I must go forth, since I cannot answer for myself. I hate the man so that I could do anything. I could even kill him. Papa will begin to entreat me, but I shall make a gesture, and say, 'No, no, my friend and benefactor, we cannot live together. Let me go.' And for the last time I shall embrace him and say in French, 'O mon père, ô mon benfaiteur, donne-moi pour la dernière fois ta bénédiction, et que la volonté de Dieu soit faite.'" I sobbed bitterly at these thoughts as I sat on a trunk in that dark store-room. Then, suddenly recollecting the shameful punishment which was awaiting me, I would find myself back again in actuality, and the dreams had fled. Soon again I began to fancy myself far away from the house and alone in the world. I enter a hussar regiment, and go to war. Surrounded by the foe on every side, I wave my sword, and kill one of them and wound another, then a third, then a fourth. At last, exhausted with loss of blood and fatigue, I fall to the ground and cry, "Victory!" The General comes to look for me, asking, "Where is our saviour?" Whereupon I am pointed out to him. He embraces me, and in his turn exclaimed with tears of joy, "Victory!" I recover, and with my arm in a black sling go to walk on the boulevards. I am a general now. I meet the Emperor, who asks, "Who is this young man who has been wounded?" He is told that it is the famous hero Nicholas. Whereupon he approaches me and says, "My thanks to you. Whatsoever you may ask for, I will grant it." To this I bow respectfully, and leaning on my sword, reply, "I am happy, most august Emperor, that I have been able to shed my blood for my country. I would gladly have died for it. Yet, since you are so generous as to grant any wish of mine, I venture to ask of you permission to annihilate my enemy, the foreigner St. Jerome." And then I step fiercely before St. Jerome and say, "You were the cause of all my fortunes. Down now on your knees." Unfortunately, this recalled to my mind the fact that at any moment the real St. Jerome might be entering with the cane, so that once more I saw myself not a general and the saviour of my country, but an unhappy, pitiful creature. Then the idea of God occurred to me, and I asked him boldly why he had punished me thus, seeing that I had never forgotten to say my prayers, either morning or evening. Indeed, I can positively declare that it was during that hour in the store-room that I took the first step towards the religious doubt which afterwards assailed me during my youth. Not that mere misfortune could arouse me to infidelity and murmuring, but that, at moments of utter contrition and solitude, the idea of the injustice of Providence took root in me as readily as bad seed takes root in land well soaked with rain. Also, I imagined that I was going to die there and then, and drew vivid pictures of St. Jerome's astonishment when he entered the store-room and found a corpse there instead of myself. Likewise, recollecting what Natalia Savishna had told me of the 40 days during which the souls of the departed must hover around their earthly home, I imagined myself flying through the rooms of Grandmamma's house, and seeing Lubotshka's bitter tears, and hearing Grandmamma's lamentations, and listening to Papa and St. Jerome talking together. "He was a fine boy," Papa would say with tears in his eyes. "Yes," St. Jerome would reply, "but a sad scapegrace and good for nothing." "But you should respect the dead," would expostulate Papa. "You were the cause of his death. You frightened him until he could no longer bear the thought of humiliation which you were about to inflict upon him. Away from me, criminal!" Upon that St. Jerome would fall upon his knees and implore forgiveness, and when the 40 days were ended my soul would fly to heaven and see there something wonderfully beautiful, white and transparent, and know that it was Mamma. And that something would embrace me and caress me, yet all at once I should feel troubled and not know her. "If it be you," I should say to her, "show yourself more distinctly, so that I may embrace you in return." And her voice would answer me, "Do you not feel happy thus?" And I should reply, "Yes, I do, but you cannot really caress me, and I cannot really kiss your hand like this." "But it is not necessary," she would say. "There can be happiness here without that." And I should feel that it was so, and we should ascend together ever higher and higher, until suddenly I feel as though I am being thrown down again, and find myself sitting on the trunk in the dark store-room, my cheeks wet with tears and my thoughts in a mist, yet still repeating the words, "Let us ascend together higher and higher." Indeed, it was a long, long while before I could remember where I was, for at that moment my mind's eye saw only a dark, dreadful, illimitable void. I tried to renew the happy, consoling dream which had been thus interrupted by the return to reality, but to my surprise I found that, as soon as ever I attempted to re-enter former dreams, their continuation became impossible, while, which astonished me even more, they no longer gave me pleasure. Chapter 16. Keep on grinding, and you'll have flour. I passed the night in the store-room, and nothing further happened except that on the following morning, a Sunday, I was removed to a small chamber adjoining the schoolroom, and once more shut up. I began to hope that my punishment was going to be limited to confinement, and found my thoughts growing calmer under the influence of a sound, soft sleep, the clear sunlight playing upon the frost crystals of the window-panes, and the familiar noises in the street. Nevertheless, solitude gradually became intolerable. I wanted to move about, and to communicate to some one all that was lying upon my heart, but not a living creature was near me. The position was the more unpleasant, because willy-nilly I could hear St. Jerome walking about in his room and softly whistling some hackneyed tune. Somehow, I felt convinced that he was whistling not because he wanted to, but because he knew it annoyed me. At 2 o'clock he and Woloda departed downstairs, and Nicola brought me up some luncheon. When I told him what I had done, and what was awaiting me, he said, "Pshaw, sir, don't be alarmed. Keep on grinding, and you'll have flour." Although this expression, which also in later days has more than once helped me to preserve my firmness of mind, brought me a little comfort, the fact that I received, not bread and water only, but a whole luncheon, and even dessert, gave me much to think about. If they had sent me no dessert, it would have meant that my punishment was to be limited to confinement, whereas it was now evident that I was looked upon as not yet punished, that I was only being kept away from the others, as an evildoer, until the due time of punishment. While I was still debating the question, the key of my prison turned, and St. Jerome entered with a severe, official air. "Come down and see your Grandmamma," he said, without looking at me. I should have liked first to have brushed my jacket, since it was covered with dust, but St. Jerome said that was quite unnecessary, since I was in such a deplorable moral condition that my exterior was not worth considering. As he led me through the salon, Katenka, Lubotshka, and Woloda looked at me with much the same expression as we were wont to look at the convicts who on certain days file past my grandmother's house. Likewise, when I approached Grandmamma's armchair to kiss her hand, she withdrew it, and thrust it under her mantilla. "Well, my dear," she began after a long pause, during which she regarded me from head to foot with the kind of expression which makes one uncertain where to look or what to do, "I must say that you seem to value my love very highly, and afford me great consolation." Then she went on, with an emphasis on each word. "Monsieur St. Jerome, who at my request undertook your education, says that he can no longer remain in the house. And why? Simply because of you." Another pause ensued. Presently she continued in a tone which clearly showed that her speech had been prepared beforehand. "I had hoped that you would be grateful for all his care, and for all the trouble that he has taken with you, that you would have appreciated his services. But you baby, you silly boy, you actually dare to raise your hand against him? Very well, very good. I am beginning to think that you cannot understand kind treatment, but require to be treated in a very different and humiliating fashion. Go now directly and beg his pardon," she added, in a stern and peremptory tone, as she pointed to St. Jerome. "Do you hear me?" I followed the direction of her finger with my eye, but on that member alighting upon St. Jerome's coat, I turned my head away, and felt once more my heart beating violently as I remained where I was. "What? Did you not hear me when I told you what to do?" I was trembling all over, but I would not stir. "Koko," went on my grandmother, probably divining my inward sufferings, "Koko," she repeated in a voice tender rather than harsh, "is this you?" "Grandmamma, I cannot beg his pardon for—" and I stopped suddenly, for I felt the next word refuse to come for the tears that were choking me. "But I ordered you, I begged of you to do so. What is the matter with you?" I will not! I cannot!" I gasped, and the tears, long pent up and accumulated in my breast, burst forth like a stream which breaks its dikes and goes flowing madly over the country. "C'est ainsi que vous obéissez à votre seconde mère. C'est ainsi que vous reconnaissez ses bontés," remarked St. Jerome quietly. "À genoux." "Good God! If she had seen this!" exclaimed Grandmamma, turning from me and wiping away her tears. "If she had seen this! It may be all for the best, yet she could never have survived such grief. Never!" And Grandmamma wept more and more. I too wept, but it never occurred to me to ask for pardon. "Tranquillisez-vous, au nom du ciel, Madame la Comtesse," said St. Jerome. But Grandmamma heard him not. She covered her face with her hands, and her sobs soon passed to hiccups and hysteria. Mimi and Gasha came running in with frightened faces. Salts and spirits were applied, and the whole house was soon in a ferment. "You may feel pleased at your work," said St. Jerome to me as he led me from the room. Good God, what have I done? I thought to myself. What a terribly bad boy I am! As soon as St. Jerome, bidding me to go into his room, had returned to Grandmamma, I, all unconscious of what I was doing, ran down the grand staircase leading to the front door. Whether I intended to drown myself, or whether merely to run away from home, I do not remember. I only know that I went blindly on, my face covered with my hands that I might see nothing. "Where are you going to?" asked a well-known voice. "I want you, my boy." I would have passed on, but Papa caught hold of me and said sternly, "Come here, you impudent rascal! "How could you dare to do such a thing as to touch the portfolio in my study?" he went on as he dragged me into his room. "Oh, you are silent, eh?" and he pulled my ear. "Yes, I was naughty," I said. "I don't know myself what came over me then." "So you don't know what came over you? You don't know? You don't know?" he repeated as he pulled my ear harder and harder. "Will you go and put your nose where you ought not to again? Will you? Will you?" Although my ear was in great pain, I did not cry, but, on the contrary, felt a sort of morally pleasing sensation. No sooner did he let go of my ear than I seized his hand and covered it with tears and kisses. "Please whip me," I cried, sobbing. "Please hurt me the more and more, for I am a wretched, bad, miserable boy." "Why, what on earth is the matter with you?" he said, giving me a slight push from him. "No, I will not go away," I continued, seizing his coat. "Every one else hates me, I know that, but do you listen to me and protect me, or else send me away altogether. I cannot live with him. He tries to humiliate me. He tells me to kneel before him, and wants to strike me. I can't stand it. I'm not a baby. I can't stand it. I shall die. I shall kill myself. He told Grandmamma that I was naughty, and now she is ill. She will die through me. It is all his fault. Please let me... Why should he torment me?" The tears choked my further speech. I sat down on the sofa, and, with my head buried on Papa's knees, sobbed until I thought I should die of grief. "Come, come, why are you such a water-pump?" said Papa compassionately, as he stooped over me. "He is such a bully! He is murdering me! I shall die! Nobody loves me at all!" I gasped almost inaudibly, and went into convulsions. Papa lifted me up, and carried me to my bedroom, where I fell asleep. When I awoke it was late. Only a solitary candle burned in the room, while beside the bed there were seated Mimi, Lubotshka, and our doctor. In their faces I could discern anxiety for my health, so, although I felt so well after my 12 hours' sleep that I could have got up directly, I thought it best to let them continue thinking that I was unwell. End of Section 4. Recording by Bill Borst.